Ignorant officer mocks a simple cleaning man. Then a SEAL walks up, whispers, "Commander." The corridor smelled of bleach and wax. Not the sterile kind you find in hospitals. This was the kind that told stories. Stories of boots scuffing the same tile, day in, day out. Of machines humming long after everyone else had gone home. The kind of smell that clung to the air after hard work had been done quietly, thoroughly, and without applause. At the far end of the hallway, pushing a battered mop bucket, was a man who barely made a sound. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Weathered hands, sun-creased face. His gray shirt had the facility's logo embroidered in blue thread, same as every other custodian's. But his movements weren't tired, they were deliberate. He moved like someone used to long hours and heavier burdens. He didn't wear earbuds, didn't talk to himself. He just worked. The Fort Ridgely training facility was full of uniforms, but he wasn't one of them. He was the guy who scrubbed up after them. A civilian now, or so everyone thought. And then there was Lieutenant Connor Hart. Young, crisp, and loud. Fresh from OCS, Hart liked his voice too much. You could hear him before you saw him, barking orders down the hallway, boasting about drills, snapping fingers at recruits. He carried a swagger like it had been issued with his uniform. And today, as his boots clicked past the corridor, he locked eyes on the janitor. He smirked. "You missed a spot, Chief," he said loudly, pointing with his boot at a non-existent stain. "We gonna start charging you rent if you keep living in this hallway." A few recruits chuckled uneasily. The janitor didn't look up. He just kept mopping in slow circles, as if the remark hadn't registered. That silence seemed to irritate Hart more than any response would have. "Hey," Hart stepped closer. "You deaf, old-timer? We're just slow." The mop paused. The janitor straightened slightly, but still didn't speak. His face remained calm. Not angry, just still, like stone. It was the kind of stillness that didn't beg for respect, it expected it. The air in the hallway shifted. Recruits sensed it, even if they didn't understand why. The joke stopped. One of them, a tall, buzz-cut kid with a nervous energy, took a step back. And then another voice joined the hallway. It didn't shout. It whispered. "Commander?" The voice came from behind Hart. It belonged to someone in desert fatigues, a Navy SEAL. You could tell by the patch and the posture. Upright, squared, and with eyes that had seen too much. Hart turned. "What did you say?" But the SEAL wasn't talking to him. He was looking past him, right at the janitor. And suddenly, the mop wasn't just a mop. The stillness wasn't just quiet. The recruit saw it. The SEAL knew it. But only the janitor didn't move. Not yet. For a second, no one moved. The corridor fell into that strange silence where time stretches, when 1,000 questions fill the air, but no one dares ask the first. The SEAL stood frozen, eyes fixed on the older man. Not with fear, not with pity, with recognition. The kind of recognition that wasn't earned by reputation, but by something deeper. The way only men who'd been through fire could see it in each other. "Sir," the SEAL said again, voice hushed now, more reverent. "I didn't know you were stationed here." The janitor, or the man who appeared to be one, gave a small nod. No words, just acknowledgement. Hart blinked. "Wait, what is this? You know this guy?" The SEAL finally looked at him. His expression didn't change, but something in his gaze dropped the temperature 10 degrees. Calm, but unflinching. "Lieutenant," he said evenly, "you just disrespected a man who led Task Force Valor through Kandahar in 2006. You don't speak to him. You listen." Hart opened his mouth, probably to protest, to reclaim control of the room. But then the SEAL turned back toward the older man. "Forgive me, Commander Hale," he said, posture shifting subtly to attention. "Didn't mean to blow your cover." Hale, the janitor, gave a soft sigh through his nose. The kind people make when they're too tired to be angry, but too proud to shrink. "It's all right, petty officer," Hale replied. His voice was low, gravelly, carried by the weight of years. "Didn't come here to be seen." That voice silenced the last remnants of doubt. There was nothing performative about it. No need to prove anything. It simply was. Connor Hart looked like he'd swallowed a rock. His jaw clenched. "Commander? You mean to tell me this guy, this janitor, is a SEAL?" "No," said the petty officer. He's the SEAL. The recruits stood straighter now, unsure of the proper protocol. One of them instinctively moved to tuck in his uniform tighter. The air had changed, reverence replacing mockery. And still, Hale didn't seek the spotlight. He just moved his mop aside, slowly, carefully, as if none of this changed anything. Because to him, it didn't. He hadn't come back to Fort Ridgely to be thanked. He hadn't come back for recognition. He'd come because the floors needed cleaning, and someone had to do it right. That was his mission now, and he carried it with the same precision he had once used to clear enemy compounds in pitch-black silence. But something had shifted now, not for him, but around him. The lie of invisibility was broken. They had seen him. The SEAL had spoken. And for the first time in a long while, someone had said Commander out loud. Not because it was in his file, but because it was in his presence. Commander Hale didn't return to mopping right away. He rested both hands on the handle, letting the silence settle. The kind that only veterans truly understood. No apologies. No backpedaling. Just a moment to let the truth land. The recruits stood awkwardly now. None of them dared leave. Even the most oblivious among them could feel they'd stumbled into something weightier than drill schedules or mess hall etiquette. Hale glanced down the hallway, as if checking for anything out of place. But really, he was deciding whether this moment was over, or if he owed something more. He finally looked up at the petty officer. "Didn't expect to see you again, Morgan." "Likewise, sir." The younger man's voice softened. "I saw your name on the custodial roster last week. Thought it was a coincidence. Guess I was wrong." "Not many commanders go into cleaning floors," Hart muttered from behind, still trying to make sense of what was unfolding. It was less mocking now, more confused. Defensive, maybe. Hale didn't respond to him directly. He stepped away from the mop and rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a thick, pale scar that coiled around his forearm like an old rope burn. "That was from San Jin," he said, voice steady. "We lost for that night. Burned half the way out of the compound. Took me 3 years to move this arm again." He let the sleeve fall back. "No one tells you what to do after that. Some write books. Some chase the bottle. I asked the base if they needed anyone to fix what was broken." He nodded to the floor. "Turns out, there's always something." Morgan looked at him with open admiration. "You could have gone anywhere, sir." "I did," Hale replied. "I went here." That one sentence landed like thunder. Hart, for once, said nothing. One of the younger recruits, Rodriguez, 18 and fresh out of high school, raised a hand awkwardly. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why'd you never tell anyone?" Hale looked at him, not with scorn, but with the kind of patience only found in people who've already fought all the battles worth fighting. "Because who I was doesn't clean this floor," he said. "Who I am does." It wasn't philosophy. It was reality. He'd traded rifles for mops, extraction plans for floor plans. And he'd done it not out of shame, but out of purpose. There's honor in presence, in doing the next right thing. Not everyone understood that, but those who did rarely forgot it. Morgan straightened. "I'll inform command that you're on base, sir. We'll make sure proper accommodations are arranged." "No need," Hale said gently. "Just maybe stop the lie that I'm invisible." Morgan nodded once, deeply. The hallway remained still, charged, and Hart. He suddenly felt smaller than the mop bucket beside him. Later that evening, long after the recruits had filed out and the clamor of boots had faded, the janitor's closet stood quietly in the west wing of the base. Inside, under dim yellow light, Commander Hale hung up his gray uniform shirt, the same one with faint bleach stains on the cuffs, the same one he'd worn for 3 years without a word. He moved slowly, deliberate, not from age, though time had certainly etched itself into his knees, but from memory, muscle memory, ritual, the kind that never leaves you, even after the battlefield does. He opened the narrow locker, revealing a few personal items, a pair of black work gloves, an old lunch pail, and at the bottom, folded beneath a towel, a photo. He pulled it out. The picture was creased, but not damaged. A younger Hale stood shoulder to shoulder with 5 other men. Uniforms caked in dirt, their faces worn thin by heat and combat, but they smiled. That rare kind of grin you only earn when you survive something together. All of them were gone now. All except him. He ran a thumb across their faces one by one, pausing over a man with thick brows and a crooked nose. "Miss Hubert," he whispered. A cough echoed from outside, someone passing by. Hale tucked the photo back inside and closed the locker gently. Quiet dignity had become his armor now. Meanwhile, across the base, in the officers' mess, Lieutenant Hart sat with a cup of coffee growing cold between his hands. He stared at it like it might offer answers. Morgan sat across from him, calm and unreadable. "So," Hart finally said, "that guy was a commander, a SEAL, for real?" Morgan didn't smile, didn't gloat, just nodded once. "You ever heard of Operation Windglass?" Hart frowned. "Classified op in the Karangal. I only heard bits in War College. Hostage rescue. Yeah, led by Hale. 2 squads went in, 1 came out. Because he carried 3 men out on his back and called an airstrike within 20 meters of his own position." Hart's brow furrowed. He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "Then what the hell is he doing scrubbing floors?" Morgan leaned forward, quiet but firm. "Teaching us." Without saying a word. Hart didn't reply. The next morning, before drills, Rodriguez and the other recruits walked the east wing in silence. The corridor where it had all happened felt different now, like it had been redefined. Rodriguez paused at the janitor's closet, hesitated, then opened the door slowly. Hale wasn't there, just the mop, resting neatly beside the bucket. A folded note lay on top, scrawled in clean, block handwriting. "Clean what's in front of you. See what others miss. Leave it better than you found it. CH. No title, no rank, but somehow more commanding than any salute." The base had changed, not overnight, and not in the kind of way that would show up on a report. The concrete still cracked under boots. The intercom still barked at 0600. But something in the silence had shifted, like a note held just slightly longer in a song everyone thought they already knew. The story of Commander Hale passed in whispers. Not gossip, reverence. In mess halls and locker rooms, between drills and during chow, his name carried a new kind of gravity. The kind that didn't demand attention, but commanded it. Recruits who once saw him as part of the scenery now paused when they passed him. Some nodded. Some didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. But they noticed. Lieutenant Hart noticed too. It gnawed at him. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. A hollow ache where pride used to sit. Every time he walked past a freshly waxed floor, he wondered how many of those paths Hale had cleared before he strutted over them, and how many lessons he had missed while looking down on the man who kept the foundation clean. 3 days after the incident, Hart found himself in the records room, thumbing through a file he had no official reason to access. Hale, Charles D. SEAL Team 6, classified assignments. Silver Star. Bronze Star with Valor. Navy Cross. There was a picture attached. Hale, younger but with the same eyes, steady, deeply present. Beneath the photo was a post-mission citation detailing an extraction op in northern Pakistan. 13 hostiles neutralized. 2 hostages recovered. 6 injuries. 0 deaths under his command. The final line read, "Refused evacuation until all personnel were accounted for. Sustained second-degree burns and multiple shrapnel wounds while securing the perimeter. Re-engaged after triage." Hart closed the folder. He stood in that cold, fluorescent-lit room for several minutes, file in hand, until a young ensign entered and paused. "Sir." Hart blinked. "Right. Sorry." He left without signing it out. That evening, Hart waited. He stood near the east corridor just before dusk, where the mop bucket always sat at precisely 1800 hours. Sure enough, the wheels rolled into view. Hale came into the hallway pushing the same bucket, his shirt sleeves rolled, his boots worn but polished. He paused when he saw Hart. "Lieutenant," Hale said, with no inflection. Hart straightened. "Sir, I just wanted to." "You don't owe me an apology," Hale interrupted gently. Hart hesitated. "Then, may I ask why you never said anything?" Hale regarded him with a gaze both tired and sharp. "Because real power doesn't need an audience," he said. "And real service doesn't need to be remembered. It just needs to be done." Hart swallowed hard. "May I walk with you, sir?" There was a pause. Hale gave the faintest nod. They walked side by side down the corridor, one pushing a mop, The other, for the first time, learning how to follow. That weekend, the base was quieter than usual. Drills were light. Instructors were attending an off-site conference, and most of the recruits had either gone into town or taken refuge in the rec room. But Hart didn't leave. He found himself walking the maintenance wing again, unsure why. Maybe he was chasing something. Not redemption. That felt too dramatic. Maybe understanding. Maybe humility. He passed the janitor's closet, half expecting to see Hale inside. But the door was ajar, and no one was there. Out of instinct more than reason, Hart stepped in. The closet was immaculate. Shelves lined with neatly labeled supplies. Mops and brooms standing in order like sentinels. And on a hook near the back, a jacket. It wasn't gray like the rest of the uniform. It was navy, old but preserved, with a faint trident embroidered on the shoulder, faded nearly to invisibility. No name tag, no medals, just the shape of service, hanging quietly among buckets and gloves. Hart stood still, almost afraid to breathe near it. He reached out, but didn't touch it. Then he noticed something else. Beneath the shelf sat a wooden footlocker. Not the military-issue green ones, but something older. Handmade. There were initials carved into the side, CDH. He crouched and examined it, not daring to open it. Something sacred lived in there. Memories, losses, maybe guilt too. Things earned and buried. He heard footsteps behind him. I thought officers knocked. Hart turned sharply. Hale stood at the doorway, not angry, just watching. Hart stepped back immediately. Sir, I didn't mean to intrude. It's all right, Hale said, stepping inside. You're not the first to come looking for answers and things. Hart motioned toward the jacket. You still keep it here? I keep it close, Hale replied. But I don't wear it anymore. That jacket belongs to someone who doesn't exist in this world. Hart looked at him, unsure how to respond. Hale walked past him, lifted the jacket carefully, and folded it across his arms. His hands lingered on the fabric, not out of vanity, but memory. You ever wonder what it feels like, Hale asked softly, to have the most dangerous years of your life be the ones where you were most respected, and then come home and realize nobody cares anymore? Hart stayed quiet. I cleaned this base for 2 years before anyone said more than excuse me, and I was fine with that. I didn't come here to be saluted. I came here because I could still be useful. Hart took a breath. You still are. Hale looked at him, not surprised, but measuring. Then show that, he said. Not to me. To them. He nodded toward the training grounds, where recruits were beginning to gather again, their laughter faint in the wind. Let them see what respect looks like, Hale continued. Not rank. Respect. Hart nodded, slowly. And in that moment, he stopped seeing Hale as a relic. He saw him as a compass. Monday morning came sharper than usual. The air was brisk, with a wind that smelled of iron and dust. Recruits jogged to their stations. Drill sergeants barked with renewed intensity, and across the main training field, Lieutenant Hart stood watching. But he wasn't shouting. Not today. He'd called for an unscheduled morning formation. No explanation given. Just a stern line in the duty log. Report to Echo Field. Full uniform. 0600. By 0602, the squad stood in formation. Confused. Restless. Wondering if this was some punishment in disguise. Then Hale walked onto the field. Not in a janitor's uniform, but in the jacket. The old Navy jacket. Faded trident. Sleeves rolled. No medals, no stripes, just presence. No one said a word. Hale walked slowly down the line of recruits, boots silent on the dry grass. His hands were behind his back, his gaze fixed forward, like he was inspecting more than posture. He was reading the air, watching who fidgeted, who breathed too loud, who flinched under silence. He stopped halfway down the line. Rodriguez was in front of him. Hale said, "What's the first principle of entry?" Rodriguez blinked. Breach, dominate, secure? Incorrect, Hale replied. The first principle is, know why you're there. He turned to face the whole line. You can train for hours, he said, voice steady, run drills, recite protocols. But if you don't know why you're stepping through that door, you'll hesitate. And hesitation gets people killed. The recruits stiffened. This base, Hale continued, is not just here to make you strong. It's here to teach you restraint, discipline, Clarity. He paced again, slower now. You think I came back to mop floors? I came back to observe. And what I saw was a generation trying to move fast without knowing where they were going. Hart watched from the edge of the field. Silent. Not commanding, learning. Hale stopped again. You wear a uniform and think it gives you weight. But weight doesn't come from fabric or patches. It comes from history. From the ones who didn't come home. From the ones who still walk, but carry names you'll never know. He tapped his chest lightly. I wear this jacket today not because I need to, but because some of you need to see it. To understand that humility doesn't mean weakness. A hush fell. Then Hale turned toward Hart. Without a word, Hart stepped forward and handed Hale a sealed envelope. Hale opened it. Inside was a formal letter from command. Honorary recognition of continuing service. It wasn't flashy. No medal ceremony. No cameras. Just a few clean lines on white paper, acknowledging a truth that had lived too long in the shadows. Rodriguez stepped out of line. Sir, he said carefully, do you still teach? Hale looked at him. I never stopped. And for the first time, the recruits didn't just stand straighter. They stood with purpose. The old classroom hadn't been used in years. It sat tucked behind the mess hall, dust on the blinds, chalk still smeared across the board from a briefing on cold weather tactics that nobody remembered. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the chairs squeaked from disuse. But the room had good bones. Solid walls. A quiet kind of patience in the air. Hale liked that. Hart had it cleaned out over the weekend. No announcement. No ribbon cutting. Just a new sign on the door. Echo Room. And on Monday evening, 8 recruits filed in. Rodriguez sat up front. Behind him, Nguyen, Patel, Greer, the ones who'd started to see Hale as more than a background fixture. Not because they were told to, because they felt it. Hale didn't stand behind a podium. He sat on the edge of the desk, jacket folded beside him, sleeves rolled, eyes calm. He didn't start with introductions. He held up a single item, a compass. Old, scratched, military issue. The kind you didn't see anymore. This, he said, got me out of more situations than any weapon I ever carried. He passed it to Rodriguez, who held it like it was made of glass. When you're deep in the field, when comms are down and the terrain shifts every hour, your GPS can fail. Your intel can be wrong. But this doesn't care about excuses. He looked around the room. Neither does life. Nguyen raised a hand. Sir, did you ever freeze in combat? Like, during a breach or under fire? Hale paused. Not because he didn't know. Because he was choosing how to answer. Yes, he said finally. Twice. First time was my second deployment. We lost a man in the first 30 seconds. His name was Ortega. Young. Too young. The room stilled. I froze because I remembered his birthday was next week. Just a moment. One breath too long. But we recovered. And we carried his tag back home. He didn't need to dramatize it. The truth was enough. And the second time? Rodriguez asked softly. Hale looked down at his hands. Scarred. Worn. Second time was here. 2 years ago. First day I walked into this base wearing a mop bucket instead of a vest. Saw a mirror in the supply closet. Didn't recognize the man looking back at me. No one spoke. He smiled. Not bitterly, but gently. You all think fear is the enemy. It's not. Forgetting why you do what you do. That's what kills. Outside, the base moved on. Intercoms crackled. Distant shouting from the training ground. But inside Echo Room, the recruits weren't just learning tactics. They were learning presence. Stillness. The kind of discipline that lived beyond the mission. Hart stepped in near the end. He didn't speak either. Just listened from the back, arms folded. The class ended not with applause, but with quiet nods. The kind you give to someone who just told the truth. Hale stood, retrieved his compass, and said, Same time tomorrow. That night, Rodriguez couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of the barracks, hands folded behind his head, listening to the low hum of bunkmates breathing and the faint rustle of sheets in the dark. But his mind was back in that classroom, Echo Room, replaying Hale's words over and over. Fear's not the enemy. Forgetting why you do what you do. That's what kills. There was something about the way he said it. No theatrics, no need to impress. Just truth. like it had cost him something to learn it. Rodriguez got up quietly and slipped outside. The moon hung low over the training field, casting long shadows over the chalk-marked lanes and obstacle courses. He walked past the gym, past the motor pool, until he reached the corridor near the janitor's closet. The door was slightly open. Light spilled from inside. Hale was in there, kneeling beside the wooden footlocker. He looked up when Rodriguez appeared, not surprised, not annoyed, just present. "Couldn't sleep?" Hale asked. "No, sir." Hale stood slowly, back stiff from years of hard landings and cold mornings. "Then come in." Rodriguez hesitated before stepping inside. The room was small but warm. On the shelf was a thermos, a few handwritten notes, and that same faded photograph Hale had once touched so carefully. The older man noticed him looking. "Curious?" Rodriguez nodded. "Yes, sir." Hale lifted the photo off the shelf and handed it to him. "Back row," he said, pointing. "That's me. About 27. Right before we deployed to Mosul." Rodriguez studied the picture. 6 men, arms over shoulders, dirt on their uniforms and mischief in their smiles. Warriors, but young. He pointed to one in the center, broad-shouldered, serious eyes. "Who's this guy?" "His name was Sam Bear Lawson," Hale said softly. "He used to carry extra gear so others could move faster. Said it helped him sleep better at night." Rodriguez looked back at the photo. "He didn't make it?" Hale took a breath. "IED. Quick. Clean. The kind that doesn't leave time for goodbyes." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Rodriguez handed the photo back gently. "Do you think about them every day?" "Every damn day," Hale replied, placing it back on the shelf. "But not just because they're gone. Because I owe it to them to keep doing the small things right." Rodriguez nodded slowly, letting that settle in his bones. Then Hale surprised him. "Tomorrow, I want you to run the last 10 minutes of class." "Me, sir?" "You've got a question behind your eyes every time you sit down," Hale said. "Time to find your voice in the answer." Rodriguez stood a little straighter. "Yes, sir." As he left the closet and stepped back into the cold night air, he didn't feel like a recruit anymore. He felt like a thread, part of something older, quieter, and unbreakable. Rodriguez spent the whole next day thinking about what he'd say. Not in the way you prepare for a speech. No note cards, no rehearsals, but in that quiet way soldiers do when they know every word carries weight. Hale hadn't given him a topic, just a time, 10 minutes, and a trust he hadn't yet earned. By the time Echo Room filled that evening, the air was charged. The same 8 recruits. A few more had asked to join. Word was getting around that Hale's sessions weren't about tactics. They were about something deeper, something that stuck with you long after the last syllable. Hale stood up front, as usual, but tonight he didn't speak. He simply nodded at Rodriguez. "You've got the floor." Rodriguez walked up, boots a little too loud on the old tile. He stood in front of the chalkboard, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room. "I wanted to talk about mistakes," he began, "and how we carry them." The room quieted. He glanced at Hale, then back to the class. "My brother enlisted before me. 2 years older. Real sharp. Wanted to be special forces. He used to say, 'If you move fast enough, nothing can catch you, not even fear.'" Rodriguez's throat caught for a moment, but he powered through. He died in a training accident. Slipped off a cliff during a solo exercise. He wasn't being reckless. He was just pushing himself, like always. But he left behind a lot of people who believed in him, including me. He let that settle. I joined up because I thought I had to make up for it. Carry his name forward. Be tougher. Louder. Faster. First 6 weeks here, I overcompensated. Tried to lead drills I didn't understand. Barked at people I barely knew. Thought if I acted like I belonged, I would. He looked down for a beat. But then, I saw a man in a janitor's uniform teach an entire base what leadership really looks like, without raising his voice once. Hill didn't flinch. Rodriguez continued. And I realized, I don't have to outrun fear. I just have to know where I'm standing, know what I'm carrying, and honor it, even if it's heavy. He turned toward Hale. "I'm not trying to replace my brother anymore. I'm trying to become someone he'd be proud to follow." Silence. And then, one by one, heads nodded. Hale stood. He approached Rodriguez slowly, stopping just a few feet away. "You found your voice," Hale said. Rodriguez exhaled. "I wasn't sure it was the right one." "It was honest," Hale said. "That's all that ever matters." There was no applause, just the kind of stillness that comes when something real has just been said, and everyone knows it. Later that night, Hale added a new note to the wall beside the janitor's closet. Handwritten. Simple. Leadership doesn't begin when you're followed. It begins the moment you stand still and tell the truth. Signed, R. Rodriguez. The base was no stranger to whispers. Rumors, stories, quiet conversations held in corners of the mess hall or murmured beneath the dim glow of the barracks lights. But Hale's story was different. It wasn't shouted across the training grounds or broadcast in headlines. It moved slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor, subtle, persistent, and impossible to ignore once noticed. It started with small things. A respectful nod from a recruit passing by. A quick, "good morning," instead of silence. A hesitant question asked in the echo room after class. The kind of respect earned not through rank or medals, but through presence and quiet authority. Lieutenant Hart noticed it first during morning roll call. The recruits stood taller, their eyes sharper, voices a little steadier. When Hale walked through the formation, conversation ceased, not because of fear, but out of genuine regard. One afternoon, Hale pushed his mop bucket down the east wing, the wheels clicking softly on the tile. A small group of recruits followed at a respectful distance, reluctant to crowd but eager to keep pace. Rodriguez walked among them, a newfound confidence in his step, carrying the weight of the lessons learned. As they reached the training courtyard, Hale paused. Before them, a cluster of fresh recruits struggled to form a proper formation. Their movements were hesitant, uncertain, a stark contrast to the disciplined lines that defined the base. Hale called out quietly, "Lieutenant Hart." Hart approached promptly, his brow furrowed in mild frustration. "There's a group of freshers out here who don't know how to stand at attention properly," Hale said. Hart nodded, stepping toward the recruits, demonstrating the stance with precision. Feet together, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised. His voice was crisp, but lacked warmth. Hale observed quietly, then turned toward Rodriguez. "Your turn," he said simply. Rodriguez blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, I want you to show them." A flush of uncertainty crossed Rodriguez's face, but he nodded. Stepping forward, Rodriguez squared his shoulders and took a breath. His voice, though calm, carried a strength that commanded attention. Feet together, shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward. The recruits mimicked him, their awkwardness melting into focus. Rodriguez moved among them, correcting posture and offering quiet encouragement. His confidence grew with every step. Hale watched silently, a faint smile touching his lips. After the recruits dispersed, Rodriguez approached Hale. "Thank you, sir, for trusting me." Hale met his gaze, eyes steady. Trust is earned by showing up every day, even when no one's watching. Rodriguez nodded slowly. The lesson was clear. Leadership wasn't about shouting commands or flaunting authority. It was about consistency, humility, and presence. That day, the base shifted slightly, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet footsteps of a few who chose to stand differently. Hale pushed his mop bucket once more down the corridor, not as a forgotten janitor, but as a living testament to what honor looked like in its simplest, most enduring form. Days blurred into weeks, but the subtle shift on the base became undeniable. It wasn't marked by ceremonies or announcements, but by small moments, nods of recognition, softer tones of conversation, and a growing awareness that Commander Hale was no longer just the janitor everyone glanced past. Hale's presence was a quiet force, steady as the ticking of a clock. He moved through the base corridors, pushing his mop bucket with the same meticulous care he'd once reserved for clearing hostile compounds. But now, his mission was different. Instead of clearing enemies, he was clearing misconceptions about strength, about humility, about what it truly meant to serve. One wet, gray afternoon, as the steady rain pelted the windows of the base's mess hall, a sharp alarm shattered the usual hum of activity. A training exercise had gone awry. A squad of fresh recruits, caught during a surprise ambush drill on the rugged outskirts, were disoriented and scattered. Some had twisted ankles. Others were shaken but unharmed. The instructors scrambled, radios crackled with urgent reports, and the tension spread like wildfire. Hale was nearby, pushing his mop bucket down a corridor when the chaos reached his ears. Without hesitation, he set the bucket aside and moved toward the source of the commotion. His steps were measured, his face calm, embodying the discipline drilled into him for decades. He navigated through the panicked recruits, placing a steady hand on shoulders, offering low, reassuring words that seemed to anchor them amid the chaos. He didn't bark orders or raise his voice. Instead, his calm presence seemed to quiet the storm. Lieutenant Hart was coordinating the medics and communicating with command, his own stress visible beneath his composed exterior. But Hale's quiet authority became a steadying influence on the younger officer. Once the recruits were regrouped and accounted for, Hale gathered them in a circle in the muddy clearing. His gaze swept over their faces, youth mixed with exhaustion and a flicker of fear. "You are trained to expect the unexpected," Hale said softly, voice carrying through the rain. "But no amount of training replaces presence of mind. Fear will test you all. It will find cracks in your armor. But discipline and knowing your purpose, that is what will carry you through." Rodriguez, still processing the shock, stepped forward. "Sir, how do you keep calm when everything's falling apart around you?" Hale met his eyes steadily. "I learned early that control doesn't come from power or weapons," he said. "Control comes from acceptance. Accept what you cannot change, focus on what you can." The recruits listened as if hearing a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Hart stood silently to the side, watching. He realized then that Hale's greatest mission had shifted. It was no longer fought in foreign lands or behind locked doors. It was here, in this base, in the hearts of these young soldiers battling doubt and fear every day. That night, the rain softened to a quiet drizzle. The base was still and dark, but Hale's footsteps echoed softly in the hallways. Not loud or commanding, but steady and unyielding. Not because of medals or rank, but because of the unshakable honor he carried, a silent guardian in a world that often forgot the price of peace. His presence was a reminder that true strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet resolve that holds the line when no one is watching. Months rolled by like the steady turning of seasons, and with each day the rhythm of the base deepened. Hale's presence had settled into the fabric of daily life, not as an announcement or a headline, but as a quiet, persistent force. His story was no longer whispered as a mystery or a rumor, but lived through subtle, meaningful moments. Recruits who once glanced at him without notice now offered respectful nods. Officers exchanged quiet words about the janitor who taught more than mop and broom techniques, who taught discipline, humility, and the strength of quiet service. The respect wasn't loud or flashy, it was earned and real. One chilly evening, as dusk settled and the sky bled with purple and orange hues, Rodriguez found Hale sitting alone on a weathered bench near the base chapel. The air was sharp and smelled of cold rain yet to fall. A few stray leaves swirled by, and the silence seemed to stretch in every direction. Rodriguez approached cautiously, careful not to disturb the stillness. "Sir," he said softly, "may I join you?" Hale's eyes, deep and steady, lifted in quiet acknowledgement. "Please," he replied. They sat together, side by side, gazing at the chapel's stained-glass windows. Soft light filtered through the colored panes, casting fractured rainbows on the cracked pavement, a silent homage to valor and sacrifice. Rodriguez broke the silence. "I wanted to ask you, what keeps you going after everything?" Hale exhaled slowly, folding his hands together. "It's no longer about me," he said. "It's about those who come after, the young men and women who will carry the burden long after I'm gone." He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out the worn, creased photograph he carried with him always. He unfolded it gently, as if waking a sleeping memory. "These men," Hale said quietly, "were my brothers in arms. The faces you see here aren't just frozen in time. They live in every lesson I pass down, every floor I clean, every recruit who learns that strength isn't just physical. Rodriguez leaned closer, tracing the faces in the photo. They gave everything. Hale continued, voice thick with emotion. Some gave more than anyone should have to, and I owe it to them to keep their spirit alive, not with medals or speeches, but with presence and purpose. Rodriguez swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words settle deep in his chest. Do you ever regret leaving the teams? Rodriguez asked, voice low. Hale shook his head slowly. No. The battlefield changed, but the fight didn't end for me. It shifted. It became quieter, less visible. But it's still here. He tapped his chest lightly. In every corridor I walk, every recruit I watch over, every lesson I share. The two men sat quietly, the world around them alive with distant footsteps, muted conversations, and the faint hum of life on base. The rain finally began to fall, soft at first, then steady, washing over the pavement and mixing with the shadows. Hale smiled then, a rare, genuine curve of his lips, full of years lived and battles endured. You're ready, he said, turning to Rodriguez. Ready to carry the torch, to lead with honor and humility, to show what it means to serve quietly but fully. Rodriguez felt a surge of pride, responsibility, and something deeper, purpose. Thank you, sir, for everything, he said earnestly. Hale folded the photograph with care and stood slowly. Remember, he said as he began to walk away, a legacy is quiet, yes, but it's powerful. It moves through the world like an unseen current, steady, enduring, and impossible to break. And with that, Hale disappeared down the corridor, not as a forgotten janitor, but as a silent guardian, a living legacy no one could overlook once they learned where to look. The quiet strength of Commander Hale had begun to ripple beyond the base's walls in ways he never expected. It was late afternoon when a soft knock interrupted his rounds in the supply corridor. He paused, mop bucket beside him, and turned toward the door of the janitor's closet. There, standing hesitantly in the dim hallway light, was a woman, middle-aged, with eyes that held a mixture of curiosity, sadness, and cautious hope. Excuse me, sir, she said softly, her voice gentle but steady. I'm looking for Charles Hale. Hale regarded her quietly, nodding. That's me. She stepped forward, extending a hand. I'm Maria Lawson, Sam Lawson's sister. The name struck Hale like a distant bell. Sam Lawson, the man in the old photograph he had kept close all these years, the brother he'd lost in a war far away but carried close to his heart every day since. I wasn't expecting visitors, Hale said softly, his voice low with years of buried emotion. Maria smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I heard you were here, that you were part of his team. I wanted to say thank you for everything you did, for carrying the weight we never could see. Hale's gaze flickered with deep sadness, the memories of long-ago firefights and cold nights returning like waves. We carried more than we should have. The burden never truly leaves, but it teaches you to hold on without breaking. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, pressing it into Hale's hands. I brought something for you. Letters from Sam. He wrote them during deployment, but never sent them. Hale carefully opened the worn envelope. Inside were several sheets of yellowed paper, edges frayed and ink faded, but still legible. He unfolded the letters reverently, as if awakening a sleeping soul. Reading silently, Hale's lips twitched with bittersweet smiles. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he absorbed the raw, honest words from a young man who trusted him more than anyone else in the world. Sam was a good man, Hale whispered, voice thick. Braver than I ever was. Maria nodded, her own voice breaking slightly. He talked about you all the time, about how you led them, how you looked out for each other, how you made sure no one got left behind. Hale folded the letters carefully and met her gaze. You've done something important by coming here. You reminded me that some bonds don't break. Memories aren't just ghosts, they're guides. Maria smiled warmly, reaching out to briefly squeeze his hand. I wanted to make sure you knew you're not alone. As she turned to leave, Hale called after her. Would you stay for dinner? There's a story or two Sam never told. Maria hesitated, then nodded. That night, in the small, worn kitchen of the base, two stories intertwined. One of loss, one of resilience, one of love that defied distance and time. They shared memories, laughter, and tears, weaving together the threads of two generations shaped by sacrifice. For the first time in a long while, Hale felt the heavy weight of his past ease, not because it was forgotten, but because it was shared. And in that quiet moment, the invisible janitor was no longer invisible. The weeks after Maria's visit felt different to Hale. The years of carrying an invisible burden, the weight of memories and losses that no one else could see, began to shift, not because the past changed, but because he no longer carried it alone. The letters from Sam weren't just words on paper. They were bridges to a time, to a brotherhood, to a story that demanded to be remembered. And with that memory came a quiet renewal. One crisp morning, Hale was sweeping the floors near the base's main entrance, the rhythmic sound of bristles scraping tile mixing with the distant clatter of boots and shouted commands. His mind wandered briefly, remembering the lines in Sam's letters about trust and loyalty, when the sudden rise of angry voices pulled him back to the present. A small crowd had gathered by the officers' lounge. A visiting officer, sharp-eyed and impatient, was berating a young recruit. The recruit's questions, simple, earnest, had drawn a wave of dismissive scoffs and harsh words. The recruit's face flushed with embarrassment and hurt, but no one stepped in to defend him. The tension was thick, like smoke in a closed room. Hale watched quietly, the old instincts stirring beneath his calm exterior. The man belittling the recruit wasn't just disrespecting a soldier. He was shaking the foundation of trust and respect essential to any team, especially one forged by hardship. Without raising his voice, Hale stepped forward. He cleared his throat gently, drawing the attention of the crowd. "Sir," Hale said with measured respect, "may I offer a word?" The officer turned, eyebrows raised in surprise and challenge. "And who might you be?" "Charles Hale, sir. Former Navy SEAL." Hale replied simply, the weight of those words settling over the crowd like a sudden hush. His voice remained steady and clear. Respect isn't commanded by rank alone. It's earned through leadership, patience, and understanding. We serve not only to lead but to lift those who follow. Turning toward the recruit, Hale added softly, "Questions are not weakness. They're the foundation of growth." The officer's stern expression softened noticeably. He gave a slow nod, a subtle admission of his misstep. The crowd began to disperse, tension draining away like morning mist. Lieutenant Hart approached Hale once the area cleared. "That was unexpected, sir," Hart said quietly. "You have a way of cutting through the noise without shouting." Hale smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of hard-earned wisdom. Years of practice learning when to act and when to listen. Rodriguez arrived then, nodding toward Hale with genuine respect. "Sir," he said, "you're the shield we didn't know we needed." Hale looked at both men, eyes steady and warm beneath the fading light. "We are all shields, each in our own way. The unseen protect just as fiercely as those in the spotlight." That evening, Hale returned to the janitor's closet, not feeling the usual solitude but the quiet presence of those who had walked beside him, past and present. He placed Sam's letters back into his jacket pocket, a silent vow etched deep in his heart. Their legacy would live on, carried not by medals or speeches, but by every quiet act of courage and kindness. The day the truth was finally acknowledged dawned clear and crisp, yet carried with it a solemn weight that settled over the base like a gentle, unspoken promise. It was not an ordinary day, though to most it would seem so at first glance. The usual bustle of drills, shouted commands, and clanking boots was tempered by a calm anticipation that hummed beneath the surface. It began in the early morning when an unexpected visitor arrived, a senior commander, a man known throughout the Special Operations Command for his quiet authority and unyielding integrity. He was not one to seek the spotlight, rarely seen beyond the walls of his office, but now he walked the base grounds with deliberate purpose. His sharp gaze scanned the barracks, the training fields, and finally settled on the janitor's closet, the unassuming place that had become a sanctuary of stories and silent resilience. Hale was sweeping the corridor near the main entrance, his movements steady and methodical as always. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention, and the commander stopped beside him, offering a respectful nod. "Charles Hale," the commander said simply, voice low but firm. "May we have a moment?" Without hesitation, Hale nodded, setting aside his broom. He followed silently, the weight of years held in his calm stride. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was quiet but charged. The commander laid out a thick dossier on the table, documents, commendations, classified mission reports, and letters of valor that had long been locked away from public view. Each paper carried a piece of Hale's story, tales of courage fought in shadows, sacrifices made in silence. "I have been authorized," the commander began, eyes meeting Hale's with solemn respect, "to inform you that your service, long unrecognized, will now receive its due honor. You will be formally recognized in the upcoming ceremony, with full military honors." Hale's expression remained steady, almost unreadable. The recognition was overdue by decades. But he understood now that honor wasn't about medals or ceremonies. It was the invisible strength carried in quiet moments, the lives saved, the burdens borne without expectation of reward. News of the forthcoming ceremony spread quickly through the base. By the day of the event, a crowd had gathered in the courtyard, recruits, officers, families, all standing with a respectful hush. Hale appeared, wearing his old uniform jacket draped over civilian clothes. His posture was upright but unpretentious. Flanking him were Lieutenant Hart and Rodriguez, both visibly proud, the weight of the moment etched on their faces. The base commander stepped forward and addressed the assembly. His words were measured, filled with reverence for the man before them. He spoke of Hale's missions, covert operations, lives saved under impossible conditions, leadership that never sought praise. He honored the resilience of a man who embodied the true spirit of service. Humility, dedication, and unwavering commitment even when no one was watching. As Hale received his medals, carefully pinned to his jacket by the commander, an almost imperceptible pause filled the air. Then, one by one, applause rippled across the crowd, growing louder and more heartfelt. It was a moment not just of recognition for Hale, but a collective salute to every invisible warrior who fought battles beyond the public eye. After the ceremony, Hale stood quietly, watching the faces around him, young recruits looking on with awe, veterans nodding in solemn respect, families moved by the story of sacrifice. Rodriguez approached gently. "Sir," he said softly, "today you reminded us all what true service means." Hale smiled, a deep, peaceful smile that carried years of pain and pride. "True service," he replied, "is not about being seen. It's about being steadfast, standing firm when no one is watching." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows over the base, Hale walked away from the crowd, not as the invisible janitor he once was, but as a living testament to honor restored. His legacy, once hidden in silence, now stood proudly in the light. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.